Hi everyone, and welcome to this exclusive Synthfest UK presentation. My name is Gregor Beyerle, and I'm a software specialist at PreSonus, but not just software specialist, also a big synth enthusiast. And that's why I'm very excited to have the privilege today to show you an overview of Studio One's or even PreSonus approach to synthesis. Because whether you're just starting out to tweak presets to get them more to your liking, or if you're already more advanced on your sound design journey, really trying to find your own signature sounds from the ground up, Studio One can either make it easy for you to start, teach you something essential about synthesis, or open up possibilities in sound design you didn't even consider. And that is even more so with Studio One 5, where we make this tool not just for virtual instruments in your software, but also for any external instruments that you might have. Me personally, I have a huge fable for the sound of true analog synthesizers because they're not perfect. So every time you play a note, you get a slightly different drift, you get a bit of a different tonality, you get a bit of a different phase, and that makes it truly unique and special, each and every note. Now, the disadvantage of that is that you don't get all the benefits of a digital workflow, such as total recall, the fact that you can open up a project 4 years later and it still sounds exactly the same way. Now, what I'm really excited about is that we managed to blend the best out of both worlds together. And this will also be a segment in my presentation here. But if you're not as experienced in synthesis and everything that I just said is kind of gibberish to you, then hang in there, because the approach of PreSonus or Studio One to synthesis starts at the very beginning. Because, for example, in our synthesizer MyTai, you can disable each and every element that constitutes the entire synthesizer and then activate just one section consecutively after one section until you understand it as a cohesive instrument. This makes it so easy to learn synthesis and subtractive synthesis in particular, and then you can go from there as deep as you want to go with multi-instruments, macro controls, and much more. But before we talk about that, maybe let's just briefly touch on why we call this workshop PreSonus approach to synthesis rather than Studio One's approach to synthesis, which is going to be the software that I'm showing. Well, and that is because the ecosystem of PreSonus is not just the software side, but also the hardware, such as our controllers, the fader port, or the Atom SQ and the Atom that you see right here. They are built from the ground up to reflect the software as good as possible in hardware, so that you also really get that haptic feel that you often miss when you don't work with an actual analog instrument. But without any further ado, let's jump right ahead, go into Studio One and have a look. Alright, and here we are on Studio One's start page, in case you've never seen it before. This is what the DAW looks like when you start it up. And let's just go to a brand new song project here, just so I can get you a bit more familiar with the general drag and drop philosophy of Studio One, arguably the cornerstone of the entire workflow. So to add an instrument such as a synthesizer, which is going to be the entire topic of this presentation, it's as easy as opening up the browser and go to the Instruments tab if that's not already opened. Now you see a couple of choices here already. We have the Impact XT, which is our drum sampler. Fantastic if you want to build drum patterns and things like that. We find the MyTai, which is the synthesizer that's analog modeled and behaves very interestingly like a true analog synthesizer in a surprising number of ways. This is probably the synth we're gonna talk the most about today. Then the Mojito, which is a monophonic, very simple but great sounding synthesizer, fantastic for basses and stuff like that. Then the Presence XT, which is probably one of our most extensive instruments as a sample player. We have some amazing add-ons like the Deep Flight 1 that just came out a couple months ago, which is such a deep synthesizer and goes way beyond MyTai's capabilities even. And the Sample 1, which is a true sampler, meaning that it also lets you record audio into it and then manipulate that. But the best synthesizer for learning in this arsenal is definitely the MyTai. So let's take a little look at that first. And we add it to our session by simply dragging it from the browser onto the next available song space, just like that. And it's immediately ready to play. This is what I mean when I'm saying that we're trying to be as intuitive as possible. So we have a very nice sound here. It's already ready to go for us. We could now go ahead with something like the Atom SQ over here and just start adding maybe an arpeggiator to it, maybe a quarter on top. Right, you get the idea. But let's look at how we can build a sound from scratch in my Thai and learn synthesis in the process, rather than just using something that somebody else has thought of for us. So to do this, we just open up the preset inspector here, and we switch to the init preset, like the initialized preset. And you can see that a lot of these parameters just turned gray. And that is because we can enable and disable every part of this synthesizer on a section by section basis, as I mentioned before. Isn't that awesome? So we can, go from nothing to one oscillator to two oscillators, and then really build from there and develop an understanding. Let me show you a couple of things that are very particular or very special about the My Thai oscillators. For example, you see this RP1 random phase value here. What does that mean? Well, if I'm playing an analog synthesizer, every note I play has a slightly different tone to it. And that is because the waveform doesn't re-trigger every time I hit a note. So it really depends on where the sawtooth, for instance, is currently at as I'm hitting the note, and that will determine the way it sounds. Let me show you. So when this is off, random phase, that means that every time I hit a new note, the waveform will start at its exact starting point, essentially. So that means you always get a note that sounds the same. Always sounds the same, right? And that is great if you want to build percussive sounds, if you want to do kick drums and stuff like that. But if you want to have a little bit of that analog imperfection that is so hard to simulate in software in there, then I would definitely advise you to turn RP random phase on. So, have a listen. Do you notice that? There it slightly got a bit more nasal. Can you hear? Some of these notes are slightly brighter. Sometimes they're sounding a bit dull. And especially if you add a second oscillator to that, also in random phase, you get a lot of unpredictability in that every note truly sounds as unique as it would out of an analog synth. This also means that if you record the same sequence twice, and you would just duplicate that after bouncing it to audio, and you pan one to the left and one to the right, My Thai would give you a true stereo, because no note is the same, just like it wouldn't be on analog synth. You can also look at that very, very nicely if you go to the effects panel. And here you're going to find some plugins such as the scope, which really allows you to just drag that to the insert section, really allows you to look at a waveform like this sawtooth here. And do you see these glitches that occur sometimes? That is exactly what the random phase does. When it's off, you see I always get this perfect waveform. But here there's all kinds of stuff happening in it, and that really makes for a richer sound in my opinion. Now let's add a second oscillator to that, also engage random phase on that one, and tune that maybe one octave up. Give that also sawtooth. And then we can spread it out. That means that we slightly start adding even more oscillators, detune them against each other, which will create a very, very intense feeling of width. Have a listen. Right? turn on the filter. Yeah, now you're probably thinking, whoa, wait a minute, how were you able to get from this basic sound into this bigger sphere, this kind of pad sound in such a short period of time? And that is because our hardware controllers are so tightly integrated with our software Studio One. That's what I mean when I refer to an ecosystem here. So in Studio One, we have this focus device button over here, and currently that's set to Atom SQ. That means Atom SQ will immediately map its 8 knobs that you see here at the top to the most commonly used parameters of this plugin. So for instance, if I engage this focus device button for Atom SQ, then I can, for example, edit the spread. I can change the sound amount if I have the character section enabled. I can change the cutoff point, the resonance, the reverb, and also the global volume. All of these things that have an immediate impact on the sound, and that's why I was able to shape this sound so drastically. Often I don't even know in which direction I'm gonna go, but because it's so easy to just turn all these knobs, I very quickly get somewhere where I want to be. And it will be sounding unique because there's so many different combinations. What are the odds that somebody else came up with the exact same sound as you did? What's also really cool is that as soon as I go to another plugin, like let's say the scope, you can see how that focus device button switched. So first it was yellow over here, and now it's here, which means that I can immediately start, tweaking stuff on this plugin. So that's really, really awesome. Of course, that also works with an EQ. So if I want to have an EQ on this instrument, it's as easy, once again, as dragging it onto the instrument track, and I can just start twisting stuff around. Right? That's really, really dope. Of course, I can also set a different device. So for example, if I would have the fader port 8 selected, as soon as I do that, then I can use the fader port 8 to control any parameters of my choice. Now, what's great about that is that I have several pages to step through, so I can really control each and every parameter of the entire synth with the fader port 8. And also I have these displays that tell me exactly which value I'm currently controlling. So this is a different approach. I really like the hands-on of the Atom SQ, but you can totally choose your weapon and combine as you please. Now you might ask, okay, Gregor, that's all fair and good, but what about external instruments? Because some of you might know that it's a bit more difficult to seamlessly integrate an external synthesizer into a DAW as it is with a virtual instrument. So let's take a look at that. And to demonstrate this, let me go through the entire process with my trusty OB6 from Sequential over here. Let's set that up from scratch so you get an idea how that workflow is. So we go to Studio One up here, Preferences, and the External Devices tab. Now you already see that I have a ton of stuff just set up here because that's just my regular studio. But just ignore that for a second and let's see how we can set up an external instrument from scratch. So we click on Add all the way down here. And now we have a choice between a keyboard, an instrument, and a control surface. A keyboard means that's really just the keyboard portion of your synthesizer. So if your synthesizer has a keyboard attached to it, you would only use that for note recording, but that's not actually producing the sound. The sound module on top takes care of that. So if you don't want to play the keyboard on your synthesizer and instead you just want to trigger the sounds of that synthesizer, there's no reason for you to set up a new keyboard. And that's kind of why we went for the separation of keyboard, instrument, and control surfaces. Set up a new keyboard if you have like a MIDI master keyboard, or if you want to record MIDI notes directly from the keyboard of your synthesizer. Otherwise, leave it alone. A new instrument is what we want to do instead, because I have my trusty Atom and Atom SQ right here, perfect to play some of the drum sounds and some of the synth sounds of my OB6. And I don't want to play the OB6 directly from its keyboard, because then I always have to get up, play and sit back down. That's pretty much the idea. So new instrument is what we want to do. And then we just enter the manufacturer name. So that would be Sequential. Used to be Dave Smith Instruments back in the day. And Sequential before that. Now it's Sequential again, but that's a side note. And device name is OB6. And now we set only send to, not receive from. Because like I said, I don't want to receive any MIDI data from the OB6. I only want to send MIDI notes and data to the OB6. So I only fill in the send to field here. And my out port would be the Quantum, because what I do in my setup here is use the same MIDI out on my audio interface to distribute to all of my external instruments. The advantage of that is that everything receives the same MIDI clock. I do that through a through-box, a bit of a difficult sentence. And each of my instruments gets its own MIDI channel. Can be 1 to 16. So I'm going with one MIDI out, which is always the PreSonus Quantum in my case, to all of my external instruments that you see here, and the MIDI channels go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So in this case, this warning can be safely neglected, that the port is already in use. I know that. And now I have to set the MIDI channel that I have set on the OB6, which is channel 5. And I did this so that I don't send MIDI notes to all of my instruments at once, and I still have total control about the whole process. Then I can send MIDI clock and MIDI clock start, but I already sent that to all channels on a separate MIDI clock anyway, so I just leave that blank for now. But in your case, you would probably have to set MIDI clock and MIDI clock start. That's all we have to do here. You can even enable MPE if you have something like the Roly C board, because Studio One 5 is also supporting that. We're going to take a look at poly pressure and what you can do with that. Not quite MPE, but also very cool in just a moment. All right, then we just click OK. That's all we have to do here. And confirm OK to go back. And now we can open up the mixer and click on the External Devices tab right here. And there's our OB6. We double click that to open it. And this is new in Studio One 5. We now have an Outputs tab. And here we get the option to link an aux channel to this instrument track, or this MIDI device, I should say. And then all I need to do here is simply assign this aux channel to the audio interface input where I've connected the output of my synthesizer to. So I'm going from my OB6 left and right output into the input number 7 and 8 of my audio interface, the Quantum. And that's exactly what I can specify here. If you don't see your audio I/O here, you can just click on audio I/O setup, add a new port, and then just tell Studio One where it is and what it is. In my case, I've already set that up, so no need for me to do it again. Set it to OB6 on line 7 and 8. And once that's done, confirm that as my default configuration here in the External Devices menu. What's really cool is that we only have to set this up once, and as soon as we did that, the workflow from here on out is pretty much exactly identical to the one of virtual instruments. And to demonstrate what the difference between an aux channel and a classic audio track is, I'm just gonna go into a new song just so you can see it very clearly and don't get confused. So, an audio track that we can do with a right click in audio track is always also an audio channel in the mixer, as you can see. Now for external instruments that we sequence with MIDI, we would much prefer to have the MIDI notes on the track and the resulting audio in the channel. And this is where aux channels come in. As you can see, aux channels create an audio channel in the mixer, but not an extra audio track that's unnecessary in that use case in the track list, which kind of results in that behavior that you know from a virtual instrument. In a virtual instrument, if I just drag that in right here, you have a track to draw in your MIDI notes, right, as shown before. And then you have an audio channel, essentially, where you can monitor and mix the resulting audio. This is exactly what the aux channel helps us to build for external instruments also. So let's see how we can do that. So we go to, yet again, a new song to demonstrate. And instead of, clicking on the My Tie right here, we go to this external instruments folder where we now also see the OB6. We simply drag that into a project and voila, it's ready to play right here from the Atom SQ. That's what my OB6 sounds like right now. Let's perhaps add an arpeggiator. And then activate hold. And then let me just quickly go to the OB6 to demonstrate it's actually on. Yeah, just to demonstrate that it's on. And yeah, from here, you pretty much proceed exactly like you would with a virtual instrument, because we also remembered to implement bank and program numbers for your external synthesizers. So let me show you this with my Pro 2. I have like a little beat that I'm currently working on with the Pro 2 right here. And here I'm actively using the built-in sequencer on the Pro 2 itself, because that has some very, very nifty features. And I'm just using this together with Studio One effects. So I'm really harnessing the power of external instruments and the amazing flexibility of Studio One at the same time. And if I want to hear this with a different preset, it's as easy as simply changing the program number. And once I have something that I like, I can pretty much save the song. The preset will always be recalled. And the only real difference to working with virtual instruments is that once your song is done, you simply click on Song, Export Mixdown, and have it happen in real time instead, because we cannot do offline rendering of an external instrument. That has to be recorded, really recorded, like a real instrument. So as you can see, it's incredibly easy to implement your external instruments in Studio One. And it doesn't stop there, because even if you have something funky like this modular system that I have here, which doesn't have any MIDI, you can still work with that, because the PreSonus interfaces, such as the Quantum Range and every Studio C interface except the 2.4C, has DC coupled outputs. And what this means is that if you have an interface such as the 2.6C, hope that my lens is going to focus on it. Yep. You can send DC coupled voltages through the outputs to control things like pitch and gates or any other CV input on your modular. So this gives you ultimate flexibility. You can work with MIDI gear, non-MIDI gear, everything. So definitely give that a go if you have a modular. All right, so let's go back into the software and talk about sound design. What kind of sound design capabilities does Studio One have when it comes to synthesis? And here we really have to talk about multi-instruments, which is one of the most powerful tools available to us in this regard, even though this is a feature exclusively available to Studio One professional users. So for this example, let's take the MyTy once again. We just drag it from the instrument tab of our browser, as we've learned, into the song space, and it's ready to play. And now let's do that again, but with a different preset, and that we're gonna drag on top of the exact same track. Let me show you. So one more click on the MyTy here opens up the preset selector. And here I'm gonna go into the lead folder and just choose the first preset that comes up here. Now I drag that onto the existing instrument track, and what happens now is quite interesting. Studio One asks whether I wanna load the preset or combine the MyTy instrument. So because Studio One has detected that the instrument is identical, it asks me if I just want to switch out the preset of this instrument or if I actually want to combine it into a multi-instrument. Now this combine option you're only going to see in Studio One Professional, but once you click that, you essentially end up with one instrument that consists of two MyTys, which is really powerful if you think about it. So this is the MyTy I had first, and this is the second MyTy I've added. I can even apply a key split, so I'm just playing the bass MyTy in the lower half all the way up to the F sharp of the first octave, so all the way down here. Right? So that is really cool for these layered kind of setups. But what I can also do is, for example, apply certain effects only on the second MyTy. but I will still perceive it as the same instrument and also mix it as one cohesive instrument. Great for EDM artists who often have like massive lead sounds, consisting of 6 layers or so. They can just consolidate that into one instrument once the layers sound consistent and good with each other, and then just, mix it as one instrument just like you perceive it in the mix. In this case, let's go a little bit more creative here and add a note effect, the arpeggiator, but let's add that only to the bass, not to the other one. And maybe let's transpose this Mai Tai up, but only the second one. And maybe apply a reverb, but only on the lead Mai Tai that plays in the upper octave. So I just go to the effects. It's so easy with drag and drop. It really is. Choose maybe the mix verb, just drag that onto the insert or send section, doesn't matter in this case. And I can, of course, go on and on and on from here. I don't have to restrict myself to just 2 instruments. I can just go beyond as much as I want. So let's say that I'm, having to stop here. I have to work on a different idea right now, but I kind of want to keep in mind what I just did. What I love to do then, and this is really a key feature of Studio One for me, I just create a new MIDI part with a double click. I just draw in a couple of notes. Maybe that's already enough. Let's just give that a quick listen. Let's just maybe duplicate that once. And then I can say, okay, I don't have enough time to work on that right now. And just simply go to the Files tab, navigate to any folder on my desktop. So maybe my Ideas folder right here. And then I can simply select this, drag that over to my Ideas folder, and what happens now is simply incredible to me. Not only do I get something back in the browser that sounds like an audio loop, but I can go to a completely different song, a completely different arrangement, even listen this back at a different BPM. And if I decide that I actually like this, I can just drag it into my song just like that. And it recalls the 2 Mai Tai instances, the insert effect I used, as well as the arpeggiator. Everything gets remembered. That is just so powerful. Yeah, I absolutely love this feature. And Deep Flight 1, one of the add-ons that are available for PreSonus XT, really took advantage of this feature in particular. Deep Flight 1 basically uses a waveform from one of the most sought-after synthesizers on the planet. For example, the Schmidt synthesizer from Germany, the Synclavier, and many others, and combines that with a field recording / texture layer, most of the time atonal, which really gives it an incredible feeling of depth. And of course, you can blend and bend between these 2 layers as much as you want. So we start out with just the texture layer. Very interesting indeed. And let's blend that with the tonal layer. So as you can see, very impressive. Let's check out the beat that I've put underneath here. So again, it feels like I'm playing just one instrument, but when we check it out, it's actually a multi-instrument consisting of no less than 3 layers, I think, each of which has a very specific task in the frequency spectrum. Right, we have like 3 different presents here. One of them is harmonic, one of them is the field recording, and then we have an engine of 1976, which was not even turned on. Let's see what that sounds like. Very nice, it's like an old string machine almost. So as we can see, that's 3 completely different instruments with different parameters, and yet we can simply, put our hands on the Add-on controller and we can really control it as one cohesive instrument. How is that possible? Well, that's because of the macro controls that you just seen, and we're gonna talk about them a little bit more in depth later, which essentially allow you to assign multiple parameters to the same knob or XY pad even. Wow. And with such a setup, the fader port is of course an ideal choice to really get those in the right relation with each other. Can also take care of stuff like panning for us. And of course, all of that is automatable. So as you can see, together with the PreSonus hardware, it's so easy to write automation and get a lot of life in motion into your beats. As you can see, multi-instruments are one of the most exciting features of Studio One Professional, and Deep Flight 1 is really taking full advantage of it. Now there's another core Studio One Professional feature that's also utilizing a very similar technology, and that's effect splitters. They are primarily used for mixing purposes, but the sound design, synthesis and creativity purposes of them are not to be underestimated. In this example, I first want to show you the true strength of effect splitters in a mixing context, and then I want to show you how you can use them for some really creative synthesis applications. So I have a guitar right here, and I'm going to apply an analog delay on it to give it a bit of room and richness, but I really dialed this in badly on purpose. Usually the analog delay is such a great and versatile tool, but I completely bastardized the settings, so bear with me. This is just for effect purposes, so you can see what an amazing tool splitters can be when you think this is never gonna work. This is the dry signal. And this is the delay signal. It immediately starts clipping and saturating and distorting, and you would think that this analog delay setting has no potential to make this sound better in any way or form, no matter what the routing is, right? Well, wrong. Let me show you. So first of all, we open up the channel editor by clicking on this icon here. And then we switch to the routing tab. That's this fork. And there you're gonna see the splitter tool. Once again, this is only available in Studio One Professional. And for me, one of the main reasons to upgrade really. And that can be applied either before, after, or in between your process chain. I'm gonna put that right here. And now I have 3 different modes in which I can split the signal, right? So I can either do a normal split, that means I'm splitting my signal in a 50-50, and one half could run through the analog delay while the other one doesn't. This would be equivalent to 50% wet, 50% dry. But of course, I can make that 100% wet and 0% dry by simply going plus 6 dB on the wet channel and minus infinity on this one. So you have full flexibility. You can do 50% dry, 50% wet, 100% dry, 100% wet, and everything in between for every plugin. So essentially, this is adding a dry-wet knob to each and every plugin that you have, which is incredibly powerful. And that's only the basic split mode. We haven't even talked about the channel split and the frequency split yet. Now, the channel split basically splits this up into a left and a right channel. Can also be really cool. But what's even more exciting is that together with a mix tool, you can actually make it into an MS split. And that's what I'm going to show you in just a second. Lastly, we have the frequency split, and that one is particularly interesting when you increase the amount of splits on your splitter. So, for example, if I have 5 of these guys, then I can sort of like a multi-band processing, apply my effects very, very precisely on only a very certain frequency range. Of course, I could also just keep it more simple, do like a 2-time split. This would be great for some multi-band sidechaining where you only want to duck down the bass response or the bass frequency, of your bass synthesizer, but you may not want to compromise the attack and clarity in the higher frequencies. So this would be a perfect application for that. But right now I want to show you my favorite mode, which is the MS mode. So the channel split by default would turn this, as I said, into a left and a right channel. So on the left, I'll just bypass this right now. We are not hearing anything because I have to turn up the signal. Right, there's a dry signal. And on the right, we have that crazy delay going on. So this is already not looking good for us. But fortunately, we have the mix tool in Studio One. Just simply look for the mix tool and add it. And the first one is going right in front of our splitter. Now we have an MS transform here. And what that means is it's going to convert a stereo left-right signal into an MS mid-side signal. That's exactly what we want. This is kind of our encoder as we're going into the splitter and converts its functionality from left-right to mid-side. Now, one thing we have to do is that when we go out of the splitter, we have to go back into left-right because this is a stereo channel and not an MS channel. So we have to make sure that we're actually decoding the signal again. So we just duplicate this mix tool at the end of our processing chain. So we're encoding from left-right to mid-side as we're going in. And then after the processing, this is important, we're going back from mid-side into left-right so that everything is working properly. So, and we can very easily double check if this works. Let's just bypass the analog delay for a sec. And if we did everything right, then the output on the right, which is now soloed, should be the sides. Oh yes, that's when I want to turn my head like that, like a dog. That's when you know it's only the sides. And this is the mids. Perfect. So now have a listen with that delay only applied to the sides. Way better. Just back off with the drive a tiny bit. Isn't that lovely? So let's check that out without. This is the dry signal. And this is wet. We can just make up for that lost gain a bit. Yeah, I clearly prefer the second one, which is so much more spacious and rich. And if I like what I hear, it's as easy as just saving this as an effects chain, store effects chain, like, I don't know, enriching MS delay. And whenever I need that, it's ready to go for me in the browser. Just go to browser, effects chains, mixing. That's the folder that I chose. And then you're going to find enriching MS delay right here. And then I can drop that on any channel that I want and get the exact same processing. So this is absolutely perfect. You just set up your favorite effects once and then you use them and start evolving with them. And this is how you end up with a second example that I want to show you right now, which is the folk style, which used to be a guitar. I'm just going to basically deactivate all the inserts so you can have a listen what it used to sound like. And then you'll see why this has something to do with this workshop or presentation about synthesis. You ready? Completely different, right? So here we actually did a frequency split. Everything that's on the left is 240 Hertz and below. So let's solo that real quick. And we apply the limiter just to make sure that these low frequencies aren't bursting out. Which I probably won't, but just to be sure. Then we have the high frequency band, which is everything above 1.2K. So this is the low and the high band only. But the magic really happens with that mid band between 240 Hertz and 1.2K. So let's solo that and let's go through the chain together. So this is what it sounds like dry. And that's going into kind of bandpass EQ, if you will. Into a chorus. And into the room reverb. And that really makes it happen. So if you get creative with this, you can achieve incredibly creative sound design results. This is not just a mixing tool, this is a highly creative synthesis tool, guys. And what's so great is that you can then go to the macro controls. I promised we would talk about these one more time at least. And you can assign multiple things to these knobs. So for example, we could have effects level knob 1 for the global gain of Pro EQ, but we could also control the depth and the voices on the chorus at the same time. We can even have a scaling set per value. So if you want to have it logarithmic or exponential, that's absolutely no problem. Wonderful. And of course, we can also go ahead and automate that right away if we want. So you probably noticed already that expressiveness is really what it's all about in Studio One. And we took that to the next level with Studio One 5, thanks to the implementation of polypressure. Now, the concept of polypressure, I think, is best understood by simply hearing it. Polypressure means that as I'm holding down a note and press it again, I can control things like the cutoff of the filter on a per note basis. So if I only press down the lowest note a bit harder, you can hear that only that one is becoming sharper. In classic monophonic aftertouch, the only thing I can do is do that for all notes with the same amount of pressure, like this. Now that is far less expressive, as you're gonna hear in just a second, especially if you listen to this part here by my good friend Michael Feiner. Pay close attention to the individual pressure informations per note. Just gonna select only the highest notes right now. See, only the lowest note got opened up. And here. Only the higher ones as the low stays constant. Gives me goosebumps every time I listen to it. It's just so incredibly expressive. And I'm super glad that we have this feature now in Studio One. You might have noticed that this demo was done with the Arturia C80V. And that is a VST instrument. And I'm bringing this up because Studio One artists didn't have VST, AU, and Rewire support without a costly add-on. Used to cost $70 extra. And we did that because Studio One artists is already included with the add-on controllers, pretty much any PreSonus controller and interface and hardware in general. But with Studio One 5, VST support and AU support and Rewire support is already included in the usual version. So if you buy something like the Atom or the Atom SQ, you get like a full-fledged DAW, plus it has full VST support. That's an absolute killer deal. Total no-brainer in my mind, especially at that price point. Now, if you're on a budget and you don't have a massive plugin collection yet, maybe you don't even have Studio One yet, but you want to get into music production without breaking the bank, then I cannot recommend PreSonus Sphere enough to you. PreSonus Sphere will give you all of the things that I've shown you today. Deep Flight 1, Studio One Professional, so many more instruments like Deep Flight 1, tons of sample content and instrument libraries. It's absolutely nuts that you get that for about $14 a month. And you also get collaboration, backup and restore, cloud storage, exclusive Learn content from me and my other colleagues, such as Joe Gilder. Definitely give it a try, maybe for at least a month, see how you like it, and you can always opt out. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Gregor from PreSonus, and see you soon, hopefully.